The early months of 1942 were among the most chaotic and desperate in American naval history. As Japan surged across the Pacific, U.S. submarines were thrust into a vast and collapsing front line, forced to operate in hostile waters with limited intelligence and outdated torpedoes. Amid this turmoil, one submarine vanished with almost no trace, the USS Shark, SS-174, a Porpoise-class boat whose final transmission would become one of the earliest naval mysteries of the Pacific War. The story of the Shark begins with an overlooked fact. When the war erupted, many U.S. submarines in the Philippines were already worn from years of peacetime patrols. Their engines were temperamental, their torpedoes unreliable, and their crews often exhausted from continuous alerts. Yet they represented the only American force capable of striking back in the opening weeks after Pearl Harbor. It was under these conditions that Shark, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Lewis Shane Jr., was ordered to patrol the waters south of Mindanao, a region quickly filling with Japanese destroyers and aircraft. The struggle of her crew was immense. The Japanese invasion force moved swiftly, supported by aggressive anti-submarine tactics the Americans had not anticipated. Depth charges were dropped with unnerving accuracy, and Japanese escort vessels patrolled relentlessly. In this environment, Shark conducted several unsuccessful attacks, hindered by the notorious Mark 14 torpedoes, which frequently ran too deep or failed to detonate. A patrol report from January 1942 hinted at mounting frustration. Targets passed within 1,500 yards. Torpedoes fired. No explosions observed. The crew would have known they were fighting at a technological disadvantage in enemy-controlled seas. By early February, Japanese convoys were pushing through the Makassar Strait, and Shark was ordered to intercept. On February 7, 1942, she sent a brief, tense message to the submarine command at Corregidor: Shark under depth charge attack. It was the last time anyone heard her voice. No coordinates accompanied the message, and no subsequent signals followed, not even an emergency beacon or an acknowledgement of orders. Within the cramped, dimly lit corridors of the Naval Cave Headquarters on Corregidor, officers repeated the transmission again and again, searching for clues in its static-filled tone. Context from Japanese records adds another layer of uncertainty. Several destroyers operating in the area reported contact with an unidentified submarine during the first week of February. One such report from the destroyer Yamakaze stated that depth charges were deployed against a submerged target showing persistent evasion. But no wreckage was recovered and no confirmed kill was logged. This ambiguity created an intelligence gap that neither side would fully understand until decades later. Some historians believe Shark may have been damaged before her final encounter, possibly by air attacks during earlier patrols. Others suspect she was caught in shallow waters while attempting to shadow a convoy, leaving her unable to dive deep enough to escape. A few naval analysts point to the possibility that her operational orders, rapidly updated as Japanese movements shifted, may never have reached her due to communication breakdowns caused by damaged relay stations in the Philippines. This would have left her navigating blind in hostile territory. The mystery deepens when examining the submarine's final assignments. A recently surfaced operational memo from January 1942 shows that Shark was briefly tasked with aiding the evacuation of key personnel from the southern Philippines, a mission that would have placed her directly in the path of Japanese destroyer screens. The memo includes a handwritten note believed to be from a staff officer: risk unacceptable but no alternatives. That stark line captures the desperation of the moment, a navy fighting a superior force while lacking resources, time, and intelligence. In modern times, searches for Shark's wreck have relied on submarine loss studies and newly analyzed Japanese logs. Despite advances in sonar and underwater mapping, the wreck has never been conclusively located. Some maritime researchers argue that wartime coordinates were so unreliable that the submarine may rest dozens of miles from her presumed patrol zone. Without physical evidence, many details of her final hours remain speculative. The loss of the USS Shark set an early tone for America's submarine campaign. Courageous crews facing overwhelming odds, often with incomplete information and failing equipment. Each unanswered question: why her position reports stopped, what her last maneuvers were, how close she came to survival, adds to the lingering sense of uncertainty surrounding her disappearance. As the war expanded and U.S. submarine operations intensified, more boats would vanish under similarly murky circumstances. And in the summer of 1944, another disappearance, that of USS Robalo, would reveal an even more unsettling blend of enemy action, minefields, and unconfirmed survivor reports. But those details, like Shark's fate, would only deepen the mysteries left on the ocean floor, waiting for Part 2. By mid-1944, the Pacific War had shifted decisively in favor of the Allies. Yet even as U.S. carrier groups advanced toward the Philippines, American submarines continued to face some of the most dangerous conditions of the war. One of the lesser-known facts about this period is that the Japanese had secretly expanded their minefields in the approaches to the Palawan Passage, an area long used by U.S. submarines as a covert highway into the South China Sea. Into this lethal corridor sailed the USS Robalo, SS-273, a Gato-class submarine whose disappearance would become one of the most unsettling mysteries in U.S. naval history. Robalo's crew, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Manning M. Kimmel, had been operating at breakneck pace for months. Their boat was durable, but the strain of constant patrols showed in her aging engines and the crew's anxious eyes. The men of Robalo knew they were heading into waters heavily patrolled by Japanese aircraft and destroyers. What they did not know, what almost no one in the U.S. Navy knew in June 1944, was that the Balabac Strait had been reinforced with new minefields laid by the Japanese minelayer Tsugaru. These magnetic and contact mines formed a hidden gauntlet stretching miles across one of the Pacific's most strategic transit points. Robalo departed Fremantle, Australia, on June 22, 1944, tasked with a high-risk mission: penetrate the South China Sea, disrupt Japanese fuel convoys, and gather intelligence on enemy movements supporting the defense of the Philippines. The struggle began almost immediately. Technical records from her previous patrol show lingering electrical problems that sometimes interfered with her radar. Yet those issues were overshadowed by the urgency of her mission. The invasion of the Philippines was approaching, and every piece of intelligence mattered. On July 2, Robalo sent what would become her final official message. She had spotted and tracked a Japanese battleship, likely the Fuso, escorted by destroyers off the coast of Palawan. The transmission, crisp but brief, indicated no immediate danger. After that signal, silence descended. Hours stretched into days with no further contact. At first, headquarters at Fremantle assumed Robalo was maintaining radio silence while shadowing a target. But by July 8, concern turned into fear. No sightings. No intercepts. No distress signals. A submarine that had performed reliably on earlier missions had simply vanished. The first insights into what might have happened came from a surprising source: Japanese police reports filed months later. On August 2, 1944, local guerrillas in Palawan relayed information through clandestine channels that several American submariners had been captured after swimming ashore near the Balabac Strait. According to the reports, a violent nighttime explosion had occurred offshore days earlier, likely the detonation of a naval mine. The survivors, dazed and injured, drifted toward the coastline, eventually captured by Japanese shore patrols. One of the most haunting pieces of evidence came from an intelligence note written by Captain Tex McLean, a senior officer at Fremantle. The note described how 4 survivors from Robalo, names withheld for security, had been held at the Puerto Princesa prison camp. McLean's handwriting added a somber annotation: survivors reportedly executed following escape attempt rumors. No dates were given. No confirmation was ever found in Japanese formal records. But multiple guerrilla sources later corroborated the presence of American prisoners at Puerto Princesa during that time. The reveal of these accounts threw investigators into disarray after the war. Official Navy statements maintained that Robalo had been lost through enemy action, cause unknown, yet private files suggested that intelligence staff strongly believed the submarine struck a mine. The lack of debris or a confirmed wreck site left every conclusion partly speculative. Additionally, some Japanese minefield charts recovered after the war were incomplete, making it impossible to map precisely where Robalo may have transited. In modern submarine loss analysis, Robalo remains a case study in operational vulnerability. Her disappearance demonstrates the deadly intersection of imperfect intelligence, unpredictable mine warfare, and the immense distances that separated American submarines from their support commands. A wartime lesson emerges from her story: even the best-trained crews could be undone by unseen threats, especially when operating at the very edge of Allied knowledge. The emotional weight of Robalo's fate endures in part because of the men who may have survived only to fall into enemy hands. Historians still debate the reliability of the guerrilla reports, yet they provide the only human glimpse into Robalo's final chapter. Their accounts, fragments transmitted through the jungle by resistance fighters, offer just enough detail to leave a lingering ache of uncertainty. The mystery of Robalo did not fade with the war's end. Her wreck has never been conclusively located, despite multiple search attempts. Each expedition has faced the same obstacle: murky wartime charts and shifting seabeds that obscure the past. As long as the submarine remains lost beneath the waters south of Palawan, unanswered questions will continue to shadow her story. In the next part, the disappearance of another submarine, USS Greyback, would challenge investigators even more profoundly, involving misidentified kill reports, navigational errors, and a wreck that eluded discovery for over 7 decades. In early 1944, American submarine operations in the Pacific reached a turning point, yet few knew how precarious their successes truly were. One of the most surprising historical facts emerging from this period is that navigation errors, not enemy action, accounted for several submarine losses later misattributed to Japanese forces. This little-known vulnerability forms the shadowy backdrop of the USS Greyback, SS-208, a submarine whose disappearance remained one of the most enduring naval mysteries for nearly 75 years. The Greyback departed Pearl Harbor on January 28, 1944, under the command of Lieutenant Commander John A. Moore. Moore's crew was seasoned, confident, and riding the momentum of a successful run of patrols that had already earned the submarine 8 battle stars. Their mission for the 10th War Patrol was straightforward on paper: infiltrate the East China Sea, attack enemy shipping, and relay communications intelligence to Allied headquarters in Brisbane. But beneath that strategic clarity lay a region teeming with destroyer groups, aircraft patrols, and shifting weather patterns that threatened to push even experienced crews toward the edge. From the moment Greyback entered the East China Sea, the struggle intensified. The area was a logistical lifeline for Japan, funneling fuel, ammunition, and troop reinforcements toward the Philippines and Southeast Asia. Japanese anti-submarine warfare, ASW, units operated almost continuously. Destroyers such as Asashimo and Hirashio maneuvered aggressively, deploying depth charges and sweeping patterns designed to box in submarines. Patrol bombers, especially Mitsubishi G-3M Nell aircraft, flew arcs over shipping lanes, turning any exposed submarine into a meteor falling toward the seafloor. Despite these dangers, Greyback performed with remarkable effectiveness. Between February 19 and February 24, she sank several enemy vessels, including the Japanese transport Nampo Maru and the tanker Ryuho Maru. Patrol reports recovered after the war show a flurry of encrypted transmissions headed to Brisbane, indicating explosive success and escalating danger. One excerpt from a decrypted message reads, "Under heavy air patrol. Multiple contacts. Forced deep twice, maneuvering for second strike." The terse, almost clipped tone reveals a crew under immense pressure, balancing aggression with survival. The last confirmed message from Greyback arrived on February 25, 1944. It stated she had sunk a large cargo ship and was heading toward Saipan to reload torpedoes. She never arrived. For decades, the U.S. Navy assumed Greyback had been sunk by a Japanese aircraft, based on wartime records that appeared to match her last known patrol area. Japanese logs indicated that on February 27, a bomber from the 761st Air Group had attacked a U.S. submarine south of Okinawa, dropping a 500-pound bomb that reportedly caused an underwater explosion. But the coordinates provided were vague, and the description matched several submarines known to be operating in the region. Intelligence officers suspected that the Japanese record was accurate, but not precise enough to confirm. Then came the reveal that reframed everything. In 2018, Japanese researchers reviewing wartime records discovered a translation error in the original 1949 post-war analysis. The coordinates of the Japanese attack report had been incorrectly converted, placing the presumed sinking 100 miles from the actual location. When corrected, the point aligned with an area previously deemed unlikely for submarine operations. Yet this detail matched perfectly with Greyback's last transmission, suggesting that the submarine may have altered course due to weather or evasion maneuvers. In 2019, using these corrected coordinates, the Lost 52 project launched a targeted search. With advanced sonar and robotic submersibles, they located a submarine wreck resting at a depth of 1,400 feet. The elongated hull, the characteristic conning tower, and a single visible torpedo tube number confirmed the find. Greyback had been located at last. Her bow section showed evidence of catastrophic damage, consistent with a direct bomb hit, while the rest of her hull lay intact, silently preserved by the cold, dark pressure of the East China Sea. For many historians, this discovery answered the operational question of how Greyback was lost. But it also raised deeper, more human questions. Why had her course shifted? Did Moore alter plans to pursue an unexpected target? Or had weather forced a deviation that placed the submarine directly beneath a Japanese patrol route? No surviving logbooks, No personal diaries and no fragment of radio traffic has ever explained the decision. The broader application of Grayback's story is clear. Wartime intelligence, though extensive, was still vulnerable to human error, mistranslation, and incomplete documentation. Navigation errors, misreported enemy actions, and the fog of war often obscured the truth for generations. Today, Grayback's rediscovery brings solemn closure but not complete resolution. Her final patrol remains a mosaic of known victories and unknown choices, her silent hull pointing toward the depths that still guard many of the Pacific's wartime secrets. And as February 1944 turned into March, yet another submarine, the USS Scorpion, would vanish into the East China Sea, leaving behind even fewer clues than Grayback. That mystery unfolds in Part 4. By early 1944, the East China Sea had become one of the most dangerous operational zones for American submarines. A little-known fact from this period is that U.S. naval intelligence frequently underestimated the density of Japanese anti-submarine barriers north of Taiwan, zones where destroyers, patrol boats, aircraft, and even early warning radar stations worked in brutal coordination. Into this tightening net sailed the USS Scorpion, SS-278, a Gato-class submarine whose disappearance remains one of the most perplexing and least documented mysteries of the Pacific War. Scorpion departed Pearl Harbor on January 29, 1944, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Maximilian G. Schmidt. Unlike some submarines that had the advantage of predictable supply lines and familiar operational waters, Scorpion's mission was both wide-ranging and fraught with uncertainty. Her orders sent her into the Yellow Sea and the East China Sea, regions notorious for sudden storms, winter fog, and increasingly confident Japanese ASW forces. Several U.S. patrol reports from nearby submarines described this sector as the most hostile stretch of ocean short of the home islands. The struggle for Scorpion began before she ever reached her patrol zone. During her transit, she reported mechanical difficulties, including a problematic main engine that forced Schmidt to operate more conservatively. Submarine maintenance logs suggest the issue could have stemmed from the strain of continuous patrols and limited dockside repairs. In a theater where survival depended on speed, maneuverability, and the ability to dive quickly, even minor mechanical problems had life-or-death consequences. On February 24, Scorpion transmitted a coded message stating she had been forced to alter course due to severe weather. Storms in the East China Sea during late winter were infamous, waves capable of rolling submarines, wind gusts strong enough to damage periscopes, and fog that reduced visibility to near zero. Schmidt's last message, though brief, revealed the tension of the moment. Encountering heavy seas. Reduce speed. Attempting to regain station. It would be the final confirmed communication from the vessel. 4 years, naval historians debated whether Scorpion fell victim to enemy action or environmental forces, but Japanese records, fragmented and incomplete, did little to clarify the picture. Some logs from the Japanese destroyer Sammy-Dare described detecting a sonar contact on February 26, followed by a deliberate depth charge attack. The report mentioned an oil slick surfacing afterward, yet no debris was recovered. Other Japanese sources, however, placed the destroyer hundreds of miles away from Scorpion's assigned patrol area, casting doubt on the connection. Another potential lead came from a Japanese air patrol that reported sighting what appeared to be a periscope feather south of Kyushu around the same time. But the report lacked precise coordinates, and later interviews with Japanese airmen revealed that periscope wakes were frequently misidentified in rough seas. What makes Scorpion's disappearance particularly difficult to analyze is the lack of post-war intelligence correlation. Submarines like Grayback left behind attack logs, intercepted signals, or surfaced wreckage. Scorpion left nothing. Her patrol zone was vast, her last known position vague, and her mechanical issues undocumented beyond brief radio notes. Some analysts believe a mine may have been the most likely culprit. The Japanese had placed extensive minefields along key straits and choke points in the East China Sea, often without keeping consistent records. Several American submarines, including USS Wahoo and USS Pompano, were later found to have likely struck mines that had never been charted by either side. But another theory has long lingered in the background, one tied to the operational pressures of early 1944. Intelligence documents from the Pacific Fleet Submarine Command indicate that several submarines, including Scorpion, were under heavy strain to produce results. Schmidt was known for his boldness. On earlier patrols, he had pressed attacks in shallow waters where escape was nearly impossible. Some historians suggest that Scorpion may have pursued a target too close to a patrol line or minefield, attempting an aggressive intercept that carried extreme risk. The reveal that deepens the mystery is a small but telling note found in a March 1944 operations report. It states that Scorpion was scheduled to rendezvous with USS Herring for refueling and coordination. Herring arrived at the meeting point. Scorpion did not. No distress signal was sent. No trace appeared on sonar. 4 crews of the silent service. Such silence was more chilling than any confirmed sinking. Modern analysis tools, side-scan sonar, underwater drones, and oceanographic modeling have been used in attempts to locate Scorpion's wreck, but the East China Sea remains one of the most geologically complex and heavily sedimented marine environments in the region. Shifting currents bury wrecks rapidly, and deep trenches complicate systematic search patterns. Search teams have identified multiple possible metallic anomalies, yet none have been confirmed as Scorpion. Her story leaves a sobering lesson. In submarine warfare, even the most experienced crews could vanish without warning, leaving families, historians, and naval analysts with only fragments of evidence and a sea of unanswered questions. The combination of weather, enemy action, mechanical failure, and human decision-making makes Scorpion's fate one of the war's most opaque losses. But Scorpion was not the only submarine to vanish during this period. Just over a year later, as the war neared its final stages, another famed submarine, USS Trigger, would disappear under even more tangled circumstances involving coordinated attacks, radio silence, and incomplete Japanese records. That mystery unfolds in Part 5. By the spring of 1945, the Pacific War was entering its final, and in many ways most chaotic phase. A fact often overlooked is that during these last months, Japanese anti-submarine forces, though heavily depleted, became more aggressive and unpredictable as they defended their remaining supply routes. It was in this volatile environment that the USS Trigger, SS-237, one of the most accomplished American submarines of the war, vanished. Unlike earlier losses clouded by geographical uncertainty, Trigger's disappearance occurred amid a confusing tangle of overlapping patrol zones, fragmentary radio messages, and hastily written Japanese reports, making her fate one of the most debated mysteries of the conflict's final year. Trigger began her 12th war patrol in March 1945, operating under the command of Lieutenant Commander David R. Connell. She was assigned to a coordinated attack group, often called a Wolf Pack, alongside USS Silversides and USS Hackleback. Their mission was ambitious: intercept Japanese carrier groups fleeing south from increasingly destructive American air raids. With the U.S. preparing for the invasion of Okinawa, intelligence from submarines like Trigger was vital to closing the noose around Japan's defensive perimeter. The struggle that defined this patrol began early. On March 18, Trigger reported sinking a Japanese freighter and damaging another, a sign that her veteran crew remained sharp despite extended months of combat. But the triumph was followed by ominous signs of danger. 2 days later, Trigger transmitted a message indicating she had been forced deep by Japanese air patrols and expended all but a handful of torpedoes. Her tone was steady but urgent, hinting that she was in an increasingly constrained operational corner. Remaining torpedoes few. Maintaining contact. Will press attack if opportunity arises. Then came the message that marked the turning point. On March 26, USS Silversides received a brief contact report from Trigger describing enemy vessels in the area west of Kyushu, likely part of a Japanese anti-submarine group sweeping the approaches to the East China Sea. The report ended with a phrase that analysts would later debate for years: last known position, followed by coordinates that corresponded with a narrow, shallow water corridor. Silversides acknowledged the message. Trigger did not respond. For nearly a week, no further word was heard from Connell or his crew. The eventual insight into Trigger's fate came from a combination of Japanese sources. In April 1945, Japanese records from the 33rd Escort Squadron described a coordinated ASW attack on March 28 involving 3 escort vessels, Mikura, Chiburi, and Kaiboken 33. According to the report, sonar operators detected a submerged submarine at 10 a.m. near the exact coordinates Trigger had last reported. The escorts initiated a prolonged depth charge barrage lasting nearly 3 hours. One annotation reads, "Enemy boat forced to depth. Large oil pool observed. Wreckage minimal." But this account was only part of the picture. A separate Japanese air patrol log from the same day indicated that a patrol bomber had sighted a periscope wake earlier that morning. The coordinates were close but not identical to the escort vessel's attack area. This discrepancy led some historians to suggest that more than one submarine might have been in the vicinity. USS Threadfin and USS Sea Dog were also patrolling nearby, and their narrow patrol boundaries sometimes overlapped. The reveal that added yet another layer of uncertainty came after the war, when declassified ultra-intercepts, Allied signals intelligence derived from breaking Japanese naval codes, showed that Japanese escort vessels had reported attacking a submarine west of Kyushu on March 28 and probable sinking, but provided no unique identifier. Allied analysts at the time could not confirm whether the sinking referred to Trigger or another U.S. submarine known to be operating in the region. The fog of war had blurred the distinctions. Moreover, a post-war operations analysis uncovered a crucial complication. The U.S. Submarine Command had unintentionally assigned overlapping patrol zones to Trigger and Silversides. This overlap may have caused Trigger to maneuver into a more confined area while attempting to intercept a convoy report from her sister boat. In those tight waters, shallow, patrolled, and mined, Trigger would have had limited room to dive or evade, especially with only a few torpedoes remaining. Modern lessons from Trigger's disappearance revolve around communication and coordination. Even small gaps in situational awareness between submarines operating in close proximity could have catastrophic consequences. Analysts studying late-war losses emphasize that submarine doctrine, though effective, sometimes demanded risk levels that pushed crews beyond the limits of safety. Today, Trigger's exact wreck location remains undiscovered. Search teams have scanned vast portions of the seabed west of Kyushu, but the combination of underwater landslides, thick sediment accumulation, and wartime charting errors continues to obscure potential sites. Each search narrows the possibilities and deepens the emotional resonance of her final days. Trigger's story illustrates how the final months of World War II produced some of the most complex and poorly documented submarine losses of the war. But there was a final mystery, one more boat whose disappearance blended intelligence failures, incomplete logs, and the silence of the deep. The USS Scorpion's earlier vanishing, echoed by the broader patterns of the silent service. In the concluding chapter, Part 6, we examine how post-war investigators tried to assemble these fragments into coherent histories, and why many questions remain unanswered to this day. In the years following World War II, as the United States Navy sifted through mountains of captured documents, decoded signals, and fragmented survivor accounts, one uncomfortable truth emerged. Even with the war over, many submarine losses could not be fully explained. A little-known fact from these early post-war investigations is that analysts often relied more on intuition and partial data than conclusive evidence, creating after-action reports that blended verified information with best guesses. It is against this backdrop of uncertainty that the final mystery of the silent service unfolds, a story not of a single submarine, but of an entire pattern of disappearances, tied together by incomplete intelligence and the unforgiving nature of underwater warfare. The struggle to determine what happened to submarines like Shark, Robalo, Grayback, Scorpion, and Trigger began almost immediately after Japan's surrender. U.S. Navy intelligence teams arrived in Tokyo armed with lists of missing vessels, hoping that Japanese operational logs would offer definitive answers. But they soon discovered that many records had been lost in the bombing of Kure and Yokosuka, destroyed deliberately in the final days of the war, or simply never created with the precision post-war analysts expected. One naval historian later wrote, "We sought clarity where the war had never allowed any." The complexity grew as investigators tried to reconcile American patrol reports with Japanese anti-submarine logs. These documents rarely aligned neatly. Japanese destroyer commanders wrote hurried battle reports in shorthand under the pressure of ongoing attacks. Meanwhile, U.S. submarines often operated in radio silence, leaving no day-by-day trail. The gaps between these sources allowed tantalizing fragments of truth to survive, just enough to raise new questions. In several cases, the truth lay buried in declassified ultra-signals. These intelligence intercepts, derived from Allied code-breaking efforts, had been one of the war's best-kept secrets. Even many submarine officers never knew how much of their mission planning was informed by decoded enemy communications. After the war, analysts reviewed these intercepts again, searching for references to U.S. submarine losses. Some ultra messages confirmed Japanese claims. Others muddied the waters. In one instance, an intercepted Japanese transmission referenced a sunken enemy boat on a date when no American submarines were known to be in that area, suggesting either a misidentification or an unrecorded incident. Such inconsistencies forced analysts into the same position the wartime commanders had occupied, choosing the most plausible interpretation without ever achieving certainty. One of the more revealing insights came from a 1946 Navy report that quietly acknowledged a structural weakness in wartime submarine documentation. It noted that some boats were dispatched with incomplete patrol orders due to broken communication chains or rushed operational planning. In a few cases, revised orders never reached the submarine. This created scenarios where a submarine's intended patrol zone differed from the area commanders believed it was in. Such misalignments could easily explain why search teams in 1944 and 1945 failed to locate survivors, wreckage, or oil slicks. Investigators also began reviewing personal letters, diaries, and recollections from surviving submarine crews. These documents offered glimpses into the emotional landscape of the silent service, crews who lived in constant tension, aware that a single mechanical failure, a drifting mine, or an unseen aircraft could end their patrol in seconds. Many veterans recalled losing contact with nearby submarines during coordinated operations, only to learn months later that those boats had never returned. These first-hand accounts provided human context to the strategic analyses, reminding post-war historians that behind each missing submarine was a crew navigating uncertainty as vast as the ocean itself. As technological progress accelerated, modern ocean mapping tools offered new opportunities to revisit these mysteries. Projects like Lost 52, using autonomous underwater vehicles, high-resolution sonar, and robotic camera systems, began rediscovering long-lost submarines. Grayback's dramatic 2019 identification proved how a single translation error could conceal the truth for decades. But for every submarine discovered, others remain hidden beneath sediment, volcanic landscapes, and steep underwater cliffs. The ocean, vast and dynamic, continues to obscure the past. The final reveal from post-war investigations is not a single discovery, but a pattern. Most submarine disappearances were not the result of one catastrophic mistake or enemy action, but a combination of factors: miscommunication, harsh weather, mechanical failure, minefields, and the limited situational awareness of two adversaries locked in a rapidly shifting conflict. In the chaos of war, even the most detailed logs could not capture every moment, every decision, or every twist of fate that led a submarine into danger. If there is a modern lesson in these stories, it is the recognition that intelligence work, whether in 1942 or the present day, rarely offers perfect clarity. The silent service operated on courage and calculation, but they also navigated in a world where information was often incomplete or outdated. Their losses remind us how much of war unfolds in the spaces between what is known and what cannot be known. Today, the Pacific holds the final chapters of many of these submarines. Their steel hulls rest quietly in the deep, preserved by the cold and pressure, their final actions recorded only in fleeting radio messages, fractured logs, and the memories of the men who sailed with them. Each discovery offers closure, yet each unanswered question draws us back into the shadows of history, where bravery met uncertainty, and where the mysteries of sunken U.S. submarines still wait to be fully understood beneath the waves.